I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone.
Hi, welcome to Arcane Mark.
To Arcane Mark. Today, we're going to talk about compelling antagonist motivation. So the antagonists in your game, they're not necessarily the monsters that the characters are fighting. They could be other forms of antagonists, but either way, their motivation is really important to make the story very compelling. And we can't get to compelling antagonist motivations without starting with
the most classic, the most stereotypical motivation of all time.
Motivation.
For the evils!
So, for the evils, to be clear, in some cases it can maybe be a compelling motivation, especially for a group that hasn't done it a lot of times before, or where it's like, no, this person is so evil that just I have to stop them because they're just that evil.
See, also, I want to destroy the world. I want to destroy everything that exists.
Okay, but wanting to destroy the world, though, you could have a much more compelling motivation for wanting to destroy the world is a goal. It is not a motivation.
Yeah.
So, I want to destroy the world for the evils.
Yes.
Is in many cases, and some groups find that a compelling motivation. In many cases, a less compelling motivation than I want to destroy the world because the world killed my daughter.
Yeah.
And now everyone should die.
I'm looking at what I was talking
about
is like, what are the kinds of things that you have the people do when they're like, I want to do it for the evils? It's just like, but why? Why are you doing this terrible thing? For the evils!
Mm-hmm. That's right. So doing it merely for the evils is usually the least compelling motivation that you can have. But it bears mentioning it because it is also simple. It's easy enough to do. It's just like, no, they're just very evil. They want to do it for the sake of the greater evil.
Yeah. And, a take on this that allows you to be a bit more nuanced and for the evils is like someone who is like doing something because they have some reason to follow some kind of powerful evil entity. But then you start getting into some of the other types of motivations that are more, shall we say, could exist in real life, like power and fame, glory, wealth.
Yes. So basically, like, lusting after power, fame, and glory are one typical motivation for antagonists that gets a little bit better and more compelling than for the evils.
Especially because then you look at why do they want that? Is it like, I want power so that I can, it's like, do they want power because at some point they were powerless and they never want anyone to rule over them again? Do they want power because they want to use that power to change or create something in the world? Do they want power because they just like being powerful and lording over other people? Because that affirms their sense of self?
There can be deeper reasons, rationales, and motivations for that motivation of power. Yeah, because it can mean maybe they were helpless before. They felt weak. And now having power makes them feel strong. Maybe they just simply are drunk on the power and it's a rush and it's like a drug to them and they have to have more.
And there are some who are convinced that there's something about themselves that is inherently superior and therefore they should be the ones that rule. You see sort of a lot of times in a fantasy setting, this might be the person who's like, yes, I am the blessed hero who has come forth and the rightful person who's chosen by the gods to yada yada yada. You are the blasphemers who must be destroyed.
That's right. So there are a lot of motivations that can lead towards world domination because I feel that world domination is a goal. Just like destroying the world is a goal, but they can have multiple underlying motivations. And those motivations can be very different. We see in chat, like, the world is a mess, and I need to rule it. Like, I am gonna fix that mess.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there can be countless motivations for any possible goal.
Yeah,
Once
I mean,
you
like, you
once
had
you
a...
know what goal your villain
Mhm.
needs to have for your story, you still have room for motivations on that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of destroying the world, like the first campaign I ever played with Mark, the villain wanted to destroy the world, but it wasn't like I wanted to destroy the world for the evils. It was kind of the opposite of that. He's like, this world is too deeply corrupted. I will destroy this world and make a new world, and then transmigrate all of the souls into it.
Yep, that's correct. And demons backed the PCs in stopping him. Because
Yep.
they were like, we put a lot of effort into corrupting this world, and we appreciate that you guys are trying to stop him, and we'll help you however we can, said the demons to the PCs. So there's a lot of ways you can play around with motivations such that their goal, in this case destroying the world, was met with a motivation that was very atypical, even though the goal was incredibly stereotypical. And that's why it's best to separate motivations from goals. So in addition to the goal of just like, I want power, I want money, I want to acquire more of something for an antagonist, you can also have antagonistic goals that are based on other emotions, such as rage or anger at the unfairness of something, or at some particular person or group of people that causes someone to lash out.
Yeah, and you know, and in some portrayals, the thing that they're angry about is like, oh wow, you're upset about this really petty thing. But in other cases, you might have a character that is the thing that they're angry about is truly like some terrible thing or an injustice in some way, but then, you know, the PCs are opposing them because of something about the way that they've decided to respond to that.
That's right.
Where it's like, okay, yeah, you know, I agree that what happened in the city was terrible, but like burning the city to the ground was not really the way to deal with that.
Absolutely. And motivation doesn't have to be a negative emotion like lust or for power or money or anger. It can be a positive motivation, an emotion that's often thought of as positive, like friendship or love.
A character who will go to any ends to like, you know, this, so you might see that's like, well, you know, I'll do anything to resurrect blank, or to win blank's heart, or to make blank happy.
Right. Like, which villain is more, like, psychologically interesting? The villain who is going to destroy the entire city just because it's evil to destroy the city, or the villain who's going to destroy the entire city even though she knows that destroying the entire city is wrong and has no other reason to do so, but because of the fact that the woman she loves really would want that city destroyed, she's going to destroy the city. Like, entirely out of love and loyalty, like, knowing the whole time, like, feeling guilty, being like, I didn't want to kill everyone in this city, but I had to do it for love.
Yeah. It can be especially interesting if the PCs and the antagonist both want to achieve the same goal, but they have completely different ideas about what kind of thing constitutes an acceptable cost or sacrifice along the way.
That is one way to make a very compelling villain, especially if they start out working together because they want to achieve the same goals, but the PCs eventually have to diverge when they see the means that the villain is going through, because also that gives the PCs the options to stick with that character. They will feel like it's their choice to face this antagonist who could have been their ally against their shared goal. And that makes it an antagonist that they're going to remember because they had the option to fight for this like kind of shady evil person and be on their side.
And then they have to decide, you know, what does that mean about us and our cause if we say that we're going to do this, or we're not going to cross that line.
That's right. It reveals more about the player characters and who they are to get to make those decisions.
Another connection that's interesting with antagonists and PCs and their deeds is like, particularly if you have PCs who did things that were like not the greatest and caused people to get hurt, having those characters resurface later on as being like, oh yeah, we totally did just leave them high and dry now, didn't we?
It's like their motivation is revenge against the PCs for something the PCs legitimately did that was kind of a jerk move.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Or maybe it wasn't that the PCs made a jerk move, but just they made like a calculated choice where it was like, yeah, we had to flood that valley to attack the enemy stronghold, but there weren't any villages there. But I guess that hunter lived there, and his daughter is still around, and like, he died in the flood.
You do want to be careful with that to make sure it doesn't feel like a gotcha. Like, how could we possibly have known? That it's more like, okay, yeah, we made a choice.
Right, they chose to flood an entire valley.
Yeah.
You would expect somebody was there.
Somebody to be there, exactly.
And then they'd be like, that's an acceptable consequence. Now, this could even be a situation where you have multiple villains, right? Like, maybe the one who flooded the valley was the PC's former ally who crossed a line, and that's a villain. And the other villain is the hunter's daughter who became a villain because of the thing that crossed the line. And now the PCs have to deal with the original villain that they were fighting before, right? When they were working with villain number 2. Villain number 1, let's say, is like the evil empire. Villain number 2 is the rebel who's gone too far. And villain number 3 is the person who was victimized by villain number 2, who was working with the PCs at the time and now hates the PCs because they remember the PCs being associated with villain number 2.
Now we're getting into the word villain here, whereas the thing that we had said before was antagonist.
Sure.
And one thing that's interesting to point out here, though, is that the people who are opposed to the PCs are not necessarily going to be, quote, the bad guys, especially if the PCs themselves have been
the PCs
less
might
than
be the bad guys.
Characters.
They easily could be.
They may, or maybe the PCs aren't like, quote, the bad guys, but the PCs are people who, who make a wide variety of decisions, and they can look at that and they can be like, yeah, you know what, our opposition here is entirely justified.
Mm-hmm.
You'll often see another classic that you'll see is like, hey, the like sort of more lawful good style antagonists where the PCs are kind of more like the chaotic neutral type, or the chaotic good type who are like, you have to do things in the proper way. PCs, characters who are it's like, wait a minute, you were just like, you were level 1 like 10 days ago. What's going on? Why are you saying you're gonna take over the army and do this kind of thing? Especially because PCs themselves are such inherently volatile and disruptive creatures. I mean, not every PC, but generally PCs as a group are. So forces that stand for order and tradition tend to make for good opposition. And, they may have very good reasons for saying, hey, don't just try to wreck everything. There's good reasons why these things are the way that they are, and I can't necessarily explain everything to you.
That's right. And so, when these antagonists aren't, like, someone you're going to punch, that can make them a very interesting antagonist to the entire campaign. Like, maybe they can't punch them because they're authority figures. Maybe they can't punch them because they're a powerful religious figure. Or maybe they can't punch them because they're just legitimately popular with the people. Possibly because they're a demagogue and they trick people, or possibly because they're likable and people just like them, even though they're opposed to the PCs.
Or maybe they can't punch them because what the antagonist is doing is not physical violence, and so they would be like taking things to a brutal level if the antagonist is, say, like sabotaging them in the arena of trade, or spinning bad rumors about them to sully their reputation. Like, that doesn't you're not reasonably going to respond to that by like assassinating someone in the middle of the night.
Right. So one way to do that is if you have these antagonists who are not escalating into like ridiculous murder and all sorts of like completely evil and villainous stuff, the PCs can be dealing with them throughout the campaign in their own different channels and venues, and there are multiple different ways this can go. Maybe the PCs are able to thwart them in at their own game. Maybe they even make peace with them or find some third path, but maybe they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And they just continue to be frustrated by that character, in which case you may consider if that antagonist is going to escalate into someone who does cross that line into someone that you're going to actually go after.
Yeah,
So,
for
like,
sure.
to give an example of this in a TV series, so some spoilers for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, if you, like, haven't seen that after a lot of years and are like, no, I was about to watch it, but Mark said some things for it. Like, there's the character Kai Wynn, who is a religious zealot who is just a problematic character for the main characters on the show. But, like, ultimately, while she may be, like, as the religious leader, she's much worse than the previous leader and causes issues. Like, she's the least of their problems. She's always politically maneuvering and causing the problem, but then she escalates into, like, working with evil dark gods, and then they just have to punch her at the end. And so she's a good example of the villain that everyone loves to hate because of the fact that just like this really annoying and thwarting of the main character's goals, but never going to the point where it's like, I can openly go after this person.
Yeah, so you're going to want to make there be some opportunity for the PCs to get wins against these characters. And you can also have a setup where they eventually become more allied with the PCs, either because the PCs find out what motivates them and they'll try to bring them over onto their side or get them to stop doing whatever it is that they're doing, or because circumstances force them to work together with the PCs.
Absolutely.
Or they realize that working together with PCs is going to be in their best interest in this particular case.
And those kind of antagonists can move back and forth, where it's like they work with you now, but then against you later.
Where it's like, the person who you can count on to help you when like Kulipas are rampaging through the streets to set things aside and not backstab you, but like you better bet that when it comes to the arena of politics, they're going to be trying to cut you down and undermine you.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's sort of like, I may not agree with you, but I can respect your skill with the blade.
100%. So it's important to know what your antagonist's motivation is, because that will let you know why, like, not just their goal, but their motivation. The goal is needed for the story. If you don't even know their goal, you basically are winging everything about that they do. But if you don't know their motivation, it's hard to have them act sort of in a different way, or in ways that actually may be delaying their goal for now because it plays to their actual motivation.
Yeah.
And such as teaming up with the PCs for a particular reason. Like, for instance, if you have the person who wants to do some horrible atrocity due to, like, revenge for their family member who was killed, and now they blame the entire government because of, like, the royal family and, like, the head people in the country were negligent, and their daughter was, like, the captain of the guard, and she was sent out to die by problem. They're gonna burn the kingdom down. But if the PCs are fighting the actual, like, demon cult that killed the captain of the guard daughter, then maybe this villain wants to help them with that.
And one of the examples that I really like from a game that Mark's been running for me is an example where, the PCs are considered by the main church to be, like, heretics and, like, BC and witches and, like, this huge problem. But they were in a town, and, like, one of the inquisitors who'd been hunting after them was there. But then the town had what appeared to be a problem with vampires, and he was like, look, let's set this aside for now, because undead that can continually propagate, we can both agree, are a bigger problem than how much we hate each other.
This is a game system that was, like, kind of Pathfinder 1 3.5 mishmash, where exponential undead spawners existed, and those inquisitors had what they called Crimson Protocol, and it was used only when there was a type of creature that was an exponential growth situation where the spawn creates spawn that creates spawn, and then eventually they envelop the entire world, potentially, theoretically, if they don't run out of things to kill.
Yes.
And they thought that there was a vampire infestation, so they agreed to work together with the PCs.
Crimson Growth Protocol. Ally with anyone you need to stop this.
They also locked down the city, and the Inquisitors also locked down the city and were willing to potentially kill everyone in the city if necessary. If it seemed like the vampires were going to overtake the city.
The Inquisitors in that setting are pretty intense.
There was also a disease that they locked down a city because it was rapidly spreading. It was supernatural and couldn't be cured because it was created by an evil goddess. And they also were considering killing everyone who was infected.
Yes.
Not the entire city. But fortunately, Linda's character cured the uncurable disease by working with a demon lord to cure it. So...
She's a very
or an
friendly demon lord.
archdevil. They're technically a type of demon lord in that setting.
I didn't say that our party wasn't sketchy. I just...
I mean, it cured the disease.
It did.
The church was going to kill all the people who had the disease.
Yeah, that's true.
So, like, ultimately, in that particular setting, there's been a lot of antagonistic characters from the church that the PCs have come to sympathize with more over time, even if they still are still flat out antagonists to the party, but they can at least understand why they created Crimson Protocol, for example.
Yes.
So that's something where if you have a rock solid understanding of the goals and motivations of these antagonists, you know how they're going to act. A good example is that same Inquisitor guy that Linda was talking about was very loyal to the church. But ultimately, his true loyalty that's even stronger than that is his loyalty to, before he became an Inquisitor, he was a soldier. And his commanding officer died saving the rest of the unit from a witch. And that commanding officer, one of his daughters, is the Oracle of the church. And the church was going to dispose of the Oracle because who was an ally of the PCs secretly, because she was politically inconvenient and an ally of the PCs secretly, but not secretly enough. And this Inquisitor guy actually, like, assassinated the church people who were going to kill the Oracle. Yes. And protected her because she was the daughter of his commander.
Basically told her, you need to go back or I'm going to need to eliminate these people.
So, like, he killed...
Because they're going to come after you.
He killed the church people... Or no, he didn't...
How did he threaten her to go back then?
No, he threatened her to go back first.
Oh, right.
That was before they actually tried to kill her.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
He needed to get her to go back anyway, and she did, but then he felt bad because he got her to return to the church, and then the church tried to kill her, which he was not expecting, but that was because Linda's character actually, like, drained their store of magical energy, so they were going to kill the Oracle for her magical energy and replace her with a more compliant Oracle. And the Inquisitor was not going to have it. So that's a good example of where one of the antagonists actually fought another antagonist in a way that was beneficial to the party because of how all of the pieces shuffled on the board. And so that's why I feel it's really, really important to know the motivations and know which of them have priority.
Yeah, and how are those going to change the goals dynamically over time based on what happens?
That's right. Many characters, if they're not a flat character, have multiple motivations that may conflict. Like the one there, where he was loyal to the church, and he wants to defeat witches and vampires and other, like, threats that can grow and cause harm and mayhem to others, but his loyalty to his former commander was his number one priority.
So there's a question. Any thoughts and differences in making compelling antagonists when your party is evil? Making interesting heroic antagonists is obviously one option, but obviously selfish and evil antagonists still work too. Probably easier if you're working for pre-written adventures that don't necessarily assume your party has bad intentions.
I think if your party is evil, it's very easy to make, like, antagonists of all stripes.
Yes.
At all times. And then if your party is evil, is like really evil, you don't even know. You can make a bunch of groups, and all of them could, no matter what you created them for, even if you created them to be allies, they could become antagonists.
Yeah. you're gonna have a lot more of the capacity of like the PCs really did something to make this group hate them.
Like, if the PCs are that evil, you literally don't know. So just give good motivations to everybody. Because even if the PCs are like, yeah, we're all part, we run up our evil backstory, and we're all part of an evil assassin cult. And you're like, okay, well, this is the evil assassin cult, and they give you lots of free money and items to help you on your assassinations and can occasionally give you missions to do. And the party's like, that's exactly what we wanted for our backstory. We're doing it. Like, it could be in the second session where they decide to murder all the other people in the evil assassin cult. And you're like, wait, I thought you guys wanted to be in an evil assassin cult, and they're helping you, and they're not doing anything other than helping you as in this evil assassin cult. They're like, yeah, but we decided to just kill them all. So that is like the most extreme you could do to try to create a group that was going to be a positive group for that evil party, and it still could get attacked.
So I think Rico's saying classic arcade market advice, just do everything well. I mean, I think what Mark is saying more there is that rather than worrying about like, oh, am I going to have like a cool antagonist motivation and like this is capital THE, the capital A antagonist, instead thinking about making sure that you have some motivation for the major points that you have in the campaign, and then once the PCs then glomp on to who's going to be their antagonist, then you flesh them out more.
That is what I am saying, is very specifically with your evil group, you have no idea. Like, if you have a group that's good aligned, and you wind up presenting like, okay, well, so in this town, you good aligned PCs, you see that there are like squamous aberrations that are eating orphans, and then you're like, okay, you're pretty sure that the PCs are gonna save the orphans from the squamous aberrations, right? Whereas if you have an evil group, maybe they'll be like, oh, those poor misunderstood squamous aberrations, everyone always goes after them just for eating orphans, and we're gonna help them attack the orphans. And you're like, why? Why am I even running for an evil group? Okay. And so as long as you just present interesting groups overall, you don't have to have a million of them. You don't have to go in depth.
Oh, we're not going to destroy the squamous aberrations. We're going to capture them so we can unleash them later on our enemies while gaining the gratitude of these people for saving the orphans.
Yep. Or like, imagine this with your evil group, right? You come to this whole thing and you're like, we've got this giant fight between the demon knights and the holy paladins, and you guys are this evil amoral crew that will do anything for money, and they're both recruiting, and you've created this in-depth motivation for both groups, and you figure they'll join one and they'll fight the other. You know all of the members of both of those groups, you know why they hate each other, they know what they'll offer the PCs, special rewards they can only get from one group or the other, different paths and other things, and the PCs are like, okay, so we need to decide for this. So let's go and sell our items from the previous dungeon while we're deciding. And they go in the store and it's like, okay, you can sell this longsword for 2 gold pieces because it's 4 gold pieces. Like, what? 50%? We're destroying the Merchants Guild. We're not joining any of these. The Merchants Guild are our enemy. 50% is a ripoff. And you're like, in real life, you're lucky to get 20% for selling your stuff. But okay, this is the hell you die on. The Merchants Guild are your enemies now.
Yeah, well, to cycle back to like talking about having motivations, I think this is also a really good session 0 advice for if you're going to run an evil campaign, to make sure that you know what the characters' motivations are, because you really don't want an adventure where one of your PCs is just for the evils.
Yes.
You want them
your PCs kind of are an antagonist to the world.
Yeah.
Even if they tell you their motivations, they may still try to kill the Merchants Guild. Like, I've had non-evil PCs get mad at the resale price in some systems that was lower than 50%, when they're used to 50%, and be like, I think maybe it was even, like, was it 4E D&D? There was some system where the very low resale price, and they were like, we're stopping. They didn't say they were going to kill the merchants. They were like, we're just going to become merchants and replace the Merchants Guild by buying things for 30% instead of 20%. and then selling them for full, and then watch as everyone sells to us instead of the Merchants Guild, because that's what the market will bear.
What I was trying to say is, like, you definitely want to know what the motivations are of those PCs, and also, like, what is the fundamental underlying reason why they're traveling together and not just backstabbing everyone in sight.
Right.
Why do they function as a group?
You do want to know that. The problem is, even if they tell you, they could change their minds.
They could.
Whereas your villain, your antagonists that you create, they may also change their minds. I've had antagonists I've created who changed their minds while I was role-playing them, and I didn't expect it. But usually they won't, and if you do, you might notice it coming because you're role-playing them. Maybe not. Sometimes it happens and it's just in the moment.
So there's a question, how would you handle abstract antagonists?
I think there was a question before that.
There was? Okay.
Let's see. There was one about a current antagonist who had motivations but not a specific goal. They were just lashing out in anger.
I think this is an example of an antagonist, not a question.
Got it. It is a good point, though, which is you could have motivations without a goal, which means that antagonist could be, once you know that, they could be guided by another antagonist or the PCs into lashing out in a way advantageous to them.
Like for that, and like in that example, like, you know, just a creature that is overcome by boundless anger and is going to direct that at anything they can. And I think that's also related to where you can go with some of the more abstract antagonists. They may have, you know, they may not have motivations that are as complex or concrete, or maybe they're not as changeable. Like, you know, maybe there's like a spirit of the temple, and it's like, and it just is like, protect the temple. Like, right. You can have things that have like a goal without a motivation if there's something that doesn't really have a mind.
Yes, and Rico said, as an example of an abstract villain, what if Twitter was the antagonist? So I imagine that Twitter as an antagonist would be like the Kai Wynn or like problematic PR campaign antagonist, where just whatever you did, like the Twitter algorithm would just spin bad things about you. And it was just difficult to fight it directly because it fed upon the drama that you were creating by attacking it to optimize its SEO and get more clicks.
Yeah.
About the conflict that you were having with this Twitter-like entity that was your villain.
Another thing with abstract antagonists is that you can also consider, you know, motivations that are more based on being driven by like a feeling or a concept rather than like you know, the motivation of this zeitgeist is toward justice, and it's like, okay, what does justice mean? And then you can consider, is what that means potentially shapeable by the events that are going on.
Yes, and like a spirit of justice can actually be a very terrifying thing. It can be a very dangerous and problematic thing, and could definitely be the kind of thing that was on your side and then later just goes completely off the deep end. And I'm sure that anyone who's played Dragon Age 2 might agree with this. Let's see. Rico says you could have a Schrodinger's antagonist who wait for the PCs to push them towards Pro or N.
Yes.
I think that's something that was just lashing out angrily that you could use as a cat's paw by getting them to lash out at your opponents is never really a protagonist. They're more of like a force of nature. And if they're a force of nature that's sort of like some kind of neutral entity that can be manipulated into acting in a certain way, it also can be a good mystery where it's attacking and nobody understands why. And they're like, why is this bear attacking us? It doesn't even make sense. And then you find out, oh, there was a villain who was leading the bear to do this.
So it could be like, you know, the bear it's like, okay, well, why is the bear doing this? You know,
its
is
cub
it magically
was dead.
compelled, or like, is it angry because something happened? Yeah, exactly.
Maybe these crows are attacking everyone in the town because of the fact that it was like those times that people dressed up in a Dick Cheney mask and stole the baby crows, and then they always attacked other people in Dick Cheney masks ever after that. And so maybe they stole baby crows while using illusion magic to look like certain targets in the city that they wanted the crows to attack. And then the crows attack those targets.
So if you're like, why would they possibly do this? Then that's a great thing to lead you to like, okay, someone created a situation where they would act in this
Exactly.
way.
Antagonists can act upon other antagonists, not only to stop them, but also to instigate them or to act indirectly from behind the scenes.
Or to mislead them in order to, you know, an antagonist could very well see that try to play one side against each other to get the PCs and another group that's a thorn in their side to
Yeah, absolutely. You can also
fight against each other.
Have an antagonist who is that plausible deniability person because they never do anything, but they're constantly like setting things up so that other antagonists go after the PCs, possibly in a very violent way. But they themselves, you check it's like, no, they didn't do anything.
And the PCs keep finding breadcrumbs that are like, yeah, there's definitely something going on, and then eventually they're able to get that proof.
And then they can go after that person finally, and they'll be very happy to be able to take down this thorn in their side.
Because it's like all of these things were caused by this group or organization or person, and so when we take them down, it's like the final boss of that entire plot arc.
It can be a very difficult and careful balancing act to create a antagonist that the PCs really despise, while also having them not immediately be defeated due to various reasons, such that it's satisfying when they defeat them later without it being frustrating that they weren't defeated earlier.
Yeah, it's difficult when you need to, like, because of the whole idea that, like, no plan necessarily survives contact with the PCs, but you can make it more likely if you set up situations, and you want to make sure that it feels fair too. Like, you don't want to just be like, oh yeah, the NPC automatically gets away after giving their villainous monologue, and like it doesn't matter what abilities you use or what spells you use, they just escape.
Yep.
Like the video game thing where like you can deal lots and lots of damage, but like this NPC is invincible because they have to survive until like the next scene where they go off and do this, and that's like, really? If it doesn't have like a solid in-game justification, it feels cheap.
Yep. And that's partially why chess masters who were never actually part of it have a better survivability rate than the villain who actually shows up. Not only were they part of it, they literally show up in front of your face.
Yeah. And sometimes they handle it by making them substantially higher level. But I mean, like, when I was doing my Council of Thieves campaign, we've talked about it in there, like, the PC Scribe buff teleported the final boss encounter a book early, and they could have beaten it.
We probably could have won with heavy casualties, but instead both groups escaped.
Yes.
Because of the fact that we didn't want heavy casualties and they didn't want to lose.
I had one of the players thank me and be like, I can't believe you let us do that. And I'm like, yeah, you guys potentially could have won here. I didn't make them any easier than they would have been a book later. So it was pretty dicey, but if you won, you won.
Yep. The outcome of the fight happened to be unacceptable to both groups, and so we all left. And then we fought them again later.
Both groups were thinking, we could potentially win this, but somebody's gonna die.
Also, importantly, the enemy group was thinking that almost definitely their leader, who was going to be the person they were trying to put in charge of the entire city, was at least their figurehead, if not their actual leader, was definitely gonna die.
Yes.
For sure gonna die. And their chance of losing everyone who was there was pretty high since they got very ambushed.
Yes.
Maybe their cleric with absurd numbers of hit points as a monster with cleric levels would have gotten away. But everyone else almost definitely was going to die, but taking like more than half of the PCs with them. And that wasn't acceptable to either group. So it was a very interesting sort of gambit and situation for where the antagonists' motivations, their ties and connections to each other, because that one devil cleric, he probably, depending on the situation, the devil who's working with the group of humans maybe would leave them high and dry. But he had secret reasons due to like the archdevil he served, who also didn't want the leader of the enemy group to die because of his own machinations that were behind the machinations of everyone else, and that person was important to him. So this led to even that devil being a voice for leaving, which was probably their group might have been willing to dig in and stay if their healer was willing to dig in.
But the healer was not.
Yep. So it was a very interesting dynamic. So I guess the thrust of this episode is that you want to just think psychologically about an antagonist as a person, not just as a plot device or a Saturday morning cartoon villain who is like, I will overthrow Castle Grayskull.
Yes. What are their motivations, and how do their motivations inform their goals? How do they prioritize their different motivations, and how do both their motivations and goals change over time? Goals can change more easily than motivations can, but significant experiences can also alter motivations, and those are both very useful and powerful tools to show the growth of a character and the impact that significant events, or one of which can be the deeds of the PCs, have.
You want to understand their motivations and their short, medium, and long-term goals, and how those interplay with each other. Sometimes the goals don't lead directly to the motivation yet because of the fact that it's a multi-stage plan, or because they're a complex enough character that their main motivation isn't the only reason that they do everything.
Yeah, it's good if their main motivation isn't the only reason they do everything. You're not necessarily going to have, like, to wrap things back to a previous episode, like the character who's like, I'm gonna spend 22 hours a day in my tower basement crafting over and over again.
Right, but like you can also have a villain who most of the time, because their motivation of this villain is maybe that they will ruthlessly corner the drug market with a horrifically addictive drug that is in this kingdom and use it to gain massive amounts of wealth and to like seize a portion of the kingdom and secede and rule it with an iron fist of their gang. But that's their motivation, is like power and money. But maybe their short-term goal is that they want their daughter's 16th birthday party to go great.
Yes.
Because that's what's happening today.
And also they have a collection of clockwork constructs that they maintain on the side for fun, and they want to find more.
They want to complete their clockwork construct collection. That could be two of their goals. And it's like, do they need that to happen to get power? Well, there's respect. Like, arguably, if their daughter's 16th birthday party goes poorly, it might hurt the respect among other drug dealers, but it's not like a big deal towards that. But like, this person is like, maybe this drug dealer is a family man and just really wants their family to be doing fine.
When they have goals that aren't always about doing something terrible that the PCs would hate, it's sometimes funny to watch the PCs be like, oh my gosh, they're making a move, they're doing this thing, what is their hidden motivation? And then it's like, no, they legit just wanted to bake their wife's favorite cake for her birthday. Like,
David Xanatos has a 10-step plan involving time travel just so that he can try to get his father, who was never happy about anything, to admit that David Xanatos accomplished something on his own. Like, that can happen sometimes. With a villain, with a complicated antagonist or villain that they have like a very human or humanizing motivation in a particular situation. And yes, Kojo, that is the guy from Gargoyles, and he really legitimately did that because he was very wealthy, but his money started when like he received mysterious coins that were very valuable. And so his father was always like, yeah, you're a millionaire, but you're not a self-made man because you just got those coins. So then, like, he did this huge manipulation with time travel so that he could then bring the coins back in time and leave them with someone who would then send it to him. And he brought his father also in the time travel. See?
I was the one who made those coins for myself.
And his father is just never satisfied with anything. And it's like that's the kind of parenting that gets you a son who is Xanatos from Gargoyles.
Yes, indeed, the trope namer behind Xanatos Gambit.
Which I think have been... a lot of those TV tropes have taken away the names of characters that are now called like some less interesting Dame Gambit, but it did used to be called Xanatos Gambit. Kojo says bad parenting is the real antagonist. There you go. I mean, that's kind of fair. In a lot of ways.
You look at how many backs... Oh, that one's still Xanatos Gambit. Awesome.
Oh, I'm glad that's still Xanatos Gambit. I know they got rid of a lot of those. Great. But yeah, a lot of motivations come down to something human, like something that happened when they were growing up, or a traumatic event.
Yeah, for both allies and PCs and antagonists alike.
And it's more interesting that way, that it was just like, I woke up one day and decided the universe must end.
Why? Because it was there.
I just want to be evil. Do you have a reason? Is it like some nihilistic thing where like the universe is gonna end anyway, so you want it to be you who ends it because you're like have a big ego? No, that's actually a really interesting idea.
Take.
I think I'm gonna tell the next person who asks me that, because it feels so philosophical. But no, I just was just like, nah, gotta destroy the universe. No other reason than that. And so do try to avoid that character if you want to be able to tell a coherent story.
One day my porridge was too cold, says Kojo, therefore destruction.
That's another type of trauma, where your porridge was too cold. It's an issue. Your porridge was too hot, too cold, or it was okay, but some random girl just came in and ate it.
Yeah.
And now you're gonna go like bear frenzy on it.
Today in retelling of classic fairy tales.
That's right. It's how the three bears became the new villains of the world. Is bad porridge temperatures or porridge thievery. Like, the real antagonist of that one was Goldilocks. She was just stealing their porridge.
Yeah, breaking into their place and stealing their stuff.
She broke into their place. She, like, sat on their furniture and just used it, whether it was the right size or not, and stole their food. Like, she was just, like, a robber and a vandal, is what she was. People just empathize with her because she is, like, this stereotype of the character you're supposed to empathize with in the stories, but she's the real villain of Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
There we go.
Yep.
Now that we've made these...
And hunger.
Yes.
That's another motivation that animals often have, and that Goldilocks had in her villainy. So now that we know why Goldilocks is a villain, Linda, did you have any more antagonist tips for everyone?
I think we can stop there. I don't know if I can top that.
Okay. Well, in that case, everyone, let's say bye to YouTube. Bye, YouTube!